camping with my husband and his family at a small remote lake in New Mexico. There were about 10 people in our group and another group of 6 people in the next campsite. It was nighttime, and both groups were doing typical activities, making s'mores, having a few drinks, and telling stories when we all heard what sounded like a little girl yelling out for help. Neither group had children with them, but we were all positive we were hearing a little girl and decided to search the area we heard the noises from together. There was a field behind our campsites, and we all saw a very tall, pure white figure standing maybe 100 feet away from us in the field, making the noises. We all agreed this thing looked maybe 6 feet tall, skinny, and white as can be. We made our way closer to investigate, but whatever it was that we saw started backing off as we got closer, and it disappeared into the trees. All night, we continued to hear a little girl calling for help as we tried to sleep. I was driving across the country with my mom and sister when I was 16, and my sister was 20. It was late, but we were well rested and alert. We were driving along an interstate and needed gas and a bathroom break, so we stopped at the only rest stop in 200 miles. There was a van full of teenagers on a road trip at the gas station, as well as a small gray car parked at the pump in front of us, with 2 young men standing still outside of it. When we got there, everything felt wrong. We'd been on the road for days and seen many rest stops at night and had never been afraid until then. My mom and sister went inside, and I stayed in the car. I heard the teenagers say they were creeped out and couldn't get the pump to work, and they left in a hurry. I was watching the car in front of us, and the 2 men had not moved at all. Not an inch. They weren't talking. They weren't on phones. They were just standing there, still as stones. My sister and mom came running back out to the car, and when they got in, the 2 men slowly turned to look at us while not moving or pivoting the rest of their bodies. And I swear to God, we all saw the same thing. They both had eyes dark as pitch and empty. Truly empty. Not black, not reflecting any light at all, just a void. We sped out of there and didn't stop until we were in the next city. The worst thing about the entire experience? We couldn't find the place on any map. We knew exactly which spot on the interstate to look, and we couldn't find it on Google Maps or any paper map we had. We even asked locals about the creepy gas station out on that stretch of road and got only confused looks. We've traveled on that interstate since, and there is no rest stop. We were driving my friend's really old beat-up Subaru through a massive graveyard. We stopped and walked down a hill and came across a little pond. There was someone sitting on a rock on the other side of the pond. The figure was all black, and we couldn't make out any features other than the fact it looked like a man who was wearing some old-style top hat. We stupidly waved and shouted, "Hey!" He didn't show any acknowledgement and continued sitting still on the rock. All of a sudden, he jumped to his feet, started running to us on the water, and then vanished in thin water about halfway on the pond. My friends and I screamed and ran back to the car. The car wouldn't start, and we heard something banging on the back of the car. It wasn't a constant bang, but every few seconds or so we'd hear it. Nobody was outside from what we could see in the dark, but something was making a noise on the car. I opened my phone and started dialing my mom to come give us a boost, but I had no service. None of us had any cell service. The next 30 minutes were spent trying to get her car started. No banging was heard afterwards, but we felt this heavy pressure around us. Finally, the car started and she hit the pedal to the metal. We sped out of the graveyard so fast. Immediately crossing the gates, all of our phones regained cell service. One thing I know for certain is that someone or something was out there, and it was not an animal or a human. When I was 37, I went to my high school reunion. I flew into the nearest airport and rented a car. The distance was about 35 miles through a very rural and almost abandoned part of the country. About 3 miles outside of town, I see someone on the side of the road flagging me down. It turned out that it was one of the guys I had attended school with. Jim, not his real name, gets in the car and we start talking. I had not seen him in 20 years, but he still looked the same, maybe a little older. We get to town, and I ask him if he wants to come to the VFW and have a drink. He says no, just take me home. Jim's parents had lived only a few blocks from my grandmother's house, and I turned in that direction, but he said to take him to the outskirts of town. There was a mobile home park out there, and I figured that is where he lived. When we reached the end of the turnoff, he said, "Just drop me here. It was good to see you again," and he walks off into the night. I go to the VFW to meet up with some of my old classmates, and we started to chat. As we are talking about who is coming to the reunion, I mentioned that I had just picked Jim up 3 miles east of town and had dropped him off. Everyone gets quiet. Even the guy singing karaoke stops and lays down the mic. My cousin goes white as a new t-shirt. Barb, Jim died on that curve 8 years ago. Rolled his car. We were all at his funeral, I was told. I started to feel really dizzy, and I went out to the car to take some deep breaths. There on the seat is the local newspaper, printed 8 years previous, containing Jim's obituary. I still have the paper. After we moved into our home, we were told a woman had died there at the hands of her abusive husband. She hated men. My dad would wake up with scratches all over himself, and whenever my brother was mean to my sister or I, he would have scratches on him as well. One day, my brother hurt our sister. He hit her with something. When he woke up later that night, he had a horrible bloody nose. The day we moved out, my brother accidentally broke his twin sister's arm while trying out a wrestling move. He swears that he would have died by her vengeful spirit that night if it wasn't our last in the house. I was standing in my parents' room, talking to my very sick dad at the time. He was dying of stage 4 esophageal cancer. I got the feeling something was behind me. I looked towards the doorway to the living room, and something about 4'6" and fully black was peeking around the corner with its hands on the doorframe. I quickly ran towards it, and it slipped back around the door. When I got outside the doorway, there was nothing. My dad was completely confused when I stepped back inside the room to tell him. People who stayed at my house in my dad's final days claimed to have seen it. My mom saw the figure on multiple occasions in multiple places until he passed away. We haven't seen it since. After my parents divorced when I was a teenager, I lived with my mother. I experienced lots of paranormal happenings. Several times when I was reading in bed, the room would start to feel really cold and uncomfortable. Next, it would feel as if something or somebody who hated me was staring at me. When I got that feeling, I would leave the room and come back an hour later. Sometimes during the day, I would see a shadow figure sneaking along my bedroom walls. Something in the flat was pretending to be my dog. I went in my room and heard a deep growl from under the bed. My dog wasn't capable of making a noise that deep. It sounded like either a really big dog or a man doing his best dog impersonation. Other times, my dog would whimper and pace in the room next to mine, but wouldn't come when called, as if he were afraid of something in the hallway. When I moved in with my father, the paranormal activity stopped. Shortly after college, I got married. We immediately moved into a basement apartment because that's all that was available within our budget. This place had a poltergeist, and my wife was terrified. Whatever resided there with us made it clear it wanted to live alone. Dishes, glasses, and other items would fly off the shelf. My wife was hit several times. There was always an ominous feeling like we were being watched. At night, when we walked through the apartment in the dark, there would be insanely bright flashes of light that would illuminate the entire room. One night, while we were going to bed, as soon as my wife and I walked into the bedroom, we heard a voice from nowhere say my name and then say, "Move." My wife looked at me. I looked at her. I said loudly, "You've got it, bud." We moved out 2 days later and stayed with family. The old lady who owned the place died a few months later, and the house was torn down. It is still an empty lot to this day, nothing but grass and a tree. I still drive by it every now and again. I worked as a forensic nurse in a hospital's lockup unit. We had one older lady who swore she was being haunted and abused by a demon, and she would call it Tiberious. So many crazy things happened while she was on the unit. We'd go into the room, do normal care, leave, and seconds later, she'd start screaming bloody murder. We'd run into the room to find her looking like she'd been in a fight with a boxing champ. Bloody lip, black eye, markings all over her body. No one ever saw her doing this stuff to herself. Things would get moved around the room by themselves. At one point, she was in protective restraints because the doctor thought she was hurting herself. There was no way she could have moved or done anything to herself while in these restraints, but new marks would always appear or her tray cart would be across the room. The room was secure, so there was no way someone else was doing this. When we asked her questions, she'd just say, it was Tiberious. After she was discharged, we always had trouble with that room. If there was going to be a rapid response or code, it happened in that room. One night, a guard reported lights blinking on and off, and it came from that room. As a paranormal investigator, I have been present during several demonic encounters, as well as a few house exorcisms. I have not been directly attacked or affected by a demonic entity. Firstly, demonic hauntings are not like what is shown in popular movies. And not everyone who encounters this type of haunting become possessed. When there is a demonic presence, they can cause a number of things to happen. Some start slowly, and other times it can get bad really fast. The one I remember the best happened in 1998 in the Chicago suburbs. At first, we did not identify it as a demonic event. Most of the activity was nothing too concerning. Doors closing, lights turning on. So we suggested the family have a cleansing done at their home, and we thought that would be that. Maybe 6 months later, the family asked me to stop by as the activity came back. I walked around the home and did not really feel much. However, as I went down to the basement, they had built a small storage closet under the stairs. In this area, I did feel something dark and angry. At the time, I was not exactly sure what this was. They told me that the activity had not only come back but was more aggressive than before. Doors would slam shut during the night. They could hear talking at all hours of the day. Not enough to know what was said, but enough to identify it as talking. Footsteps on the stairs from the basement and from the first to second floor. They reported oppressive feelings, getting angry with each other for no reason at all. No one could stay at the house alone, as the activity would really ramp up. It is believed that demonic entities cause fear and anger in a location, as they thrive on this type of energy. The stronger the demon, the worse the activity can get. During one investigation, we experienced warm spots in the home. This was late fall in Chicago. Even with a furnace running, areas would not heat up to near 90 degrees, but that is what we experienced. The only real noticeable activity, if you will, was a very oppressive, angry energy in the home. We did hear a door or two slam shut, but the feeling in the house, was what was most notable. We brought in a priest, and over the next 3 days assisted with an exorcism of the home. It took a lot of strength to push that demon out. Its hold on the home and its family was very strong. In the end, completely exhausted, we determined that we did drive the entity out. The family returned last time we talked, about 6 years ago now. They said all was fine and no additional activity happened after we helped them. As I said, not all demonic haunts are as exciting as Hollywood portrays them to be, although some can be very difficult to deal with. I would say we were lucky to have driven the entity out. It was a weekend in the summer of 1996. My boyfriend then and husband now had been arguing coming back from a club in Matamoros, just across the border. He had borrowed his mom's car, and we would cross often to Matamoros to dance and hang out with family and friends. We were only 17 years old, but we always gathered in groups. That Saturday, we began arguing and left before midnight. After we had crossed into Brownsville, the arguing continued, so we were just cruising the streets. It was not until we had driven into Southmost Boulevard that we noticed it was already past 1 a.m. The road was pitch black, but the bright lights were on. Still arguing, we were already outside city limits and began to see what looked like a fog. As we approached what looked like a man in the middle of the road, the car stalled. I kept telling my boyfriend to step on it, and he kept showing me that his foot was pressed all the way down on the gas pedal. The car was just not accelerating. We were both frantic and scared, quite honestly. The car wasn't moving, and only God knows what went through our minds. Everything seemed to go into slow motion after that. We both noticed that the figure never turned to look at us, so we couldn't see a face. This figure looked more like a man, and oddly, he didn't seem to have the lower part of his legs nor feet. However, he seemed to be walking just looking forward. After a good 30 seconds that felt like an eternity, the car felt like it finally wanted to pick up speed. We were both very scared and kept driving so fast because we wanted to see the city lights. My boyfriend couldn't speak for a while. His face looked pale and his complexion is medium dark. After several minutes, we were able to talk about it and try to figure what it was that we had just seen. For a moment, we thought it was a mojadito, slang for illegal alien that had crossed illegally since the Rio Grande River was just a mile away. We came up with a theory because we just couldn't accept the fact that we had probably seen a ghost or a spirit. To this day, we never knew what it was that we witnessed. We came to a conclusion that it had to be paranormal because we have never been able to drive down that road without getting chills, and that's during the day. We won't dare drive at night down that road. For the past 2 years, me and my spouse have both been hearing each other calling our names. This only happens when one of us is out of the house for an extended period, like a vacation or a few days' travel without the other person. At first, I was very skeptical. He said he heard my voice shouting from around the kitchen for help, and he was in the bedroom, so he didn't want to go check knowing I was not even in the same state. I pretty much laughed it off, thinking it was a trick of the ear. Until it happened to me. He was gone for about 3 days. I was in the kitchen and heard "baby help me," as clear as day in his voice. I was the same way, not checking whatever that was. It recurred many times after that. Just his voice shouting while he was off on a trip. It went away after a few months, but last month I was standing in the kitchen again and heard my own voice from the bedroom calling my cats. Here, kitty cat. Like it was mimicking me to try to get my cats to come into the room. My dog started freaking out and looked into the hallway with fear. I got goosebumps and have been trying my best to ignore it. Apparently, this is called a mimic, and I'll be researching it further. My church has offered to cleanse my home, and I have declined many times out of fear of what will happen once they leave. This has caused arguments between me and my husband because he thinks the sage will make it go away. I think it will absolutely make it furious and will hurt someone. Keys and crosses fly off of the wall often, in bedrooms and the kitchen exclusively, and I did not want to add this to the post originally because I'm more concerned about the random voices. This has seriously done detrimental harm to my marriage and mental health due to the arguing about what to do, feeling uncomfortable, whatnot. We can't just up and move right now either. I don't want to piss it off. I don't want to make it uncomfortable. I just want it to go away. I don't know how to make it stop without making everything worse. I'll try reading the Bible out loud and putting more crosses up, along with the security cameras. I have a story that'll stick with me forever and bolster my curiosity. This took place back in 2010 when I was 16 years old. My two friends, my little brother, and I, female, were living in a brand new neighborhood. My family moved into a fully furnished model home, and my friends lived in the next model home. There were only maybe 10 houses built in the entire neighborhood, leaving it very dark with limited lighting, but we still had a rather large park at the very end of our street. About a mile after the park was an elementary school that we would frequently walk to and hop the fence to play some basketball on the court. One night, my brother, my two friends, and I decided to take a walk to this school. It was about 8 p.m. and already dark outside. We played some basketball and trekked back towards the park to go home. To set the scene, there was a very long and dark road from the school to the park with absolutely no lights, already setting a creepy vibe. When you first hit the park's sidewalk, there sits a metal bench with one street lamp directly above it, shining down. We got to the park's long, curvy sidewalk and stopped dead in our tracks. Keep in mind, our neighborhood was very secluded, and we knew the faces and structures of everybody who lived there. Here we are at about 10 p.m., now staring directly at that bench with the light beaming down on a dark figure. A lady, I presume, dressed in complete black with the hooded trench coat covering half of her face. She was crouched over, making it seem as if she were older. No book, no cell phone, nothing. Just sitting there at the complete end of the night. She turned her face to us, but we still couldn't see her with all the shadowing. What happened next freaked us the hell out. She turned back to face forward and slowly stood up straight, so damn slowly, and started walking kind of sideways towards us. We were still about 15 to 20 feet away from her. By this time, we still stood there stiffened, feet glued to the ground, in complete shock with this eerie feeling consuming us. I remember thinking this shit is pulled straight out of a horror movie. She got about 5 to 7 feet away from us. I understand what people mean when they say they literally are frozen in fear, and turned directly toward us with her head still down and her face still covered. We ran. We ran for our dear lives all the way back to my house. Panting, trying to catch our breath, we couldn't get a word out just yet. I remember having tears in my eyes with just the thought of her movement coming near us. We couldn't figure out why she was there. We finally calmed down and got some sleep, but it's not over yet. The next day, in the early afternoon, we got together again, and we all walked down to that park to make sure the coast was clear just for kicks because it was pure daylight, and we wouldn't be so frightened anymore, even if the lady was there. You wouldn't believe what was on that same bench as the creepy woman was sitting on. A wild rabbit. A poor rabbit. We live in Arizona, and there are plenty of those hopping around. This rabbit was cut directly in half, right down the middle. No blood was leaking from its body at all, as if it had been drained, but there was no decaying, and it was a fresh kill. What was that hooded figure doing there? Was it even human? What are your theories on this? It's been a decade, and I still think of this story sometimes and get chills down my spine and a silly feeling in my stomach. What would she have done if she got any closer to us? I'm glad we won't ever know. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to Descent into the Unknown for more terrifying stories.